This is Lee Habib, host of Our American Stories, the show where America is the star and the American people. George Washington was, by all accounts, the indispensable American, and few things he did matched the achievement of him surrendering his own commission as the head of the Continental Army in December of 1783. Here to tell the story is the president of Hillsdale College, Dr. Larry Arnn, and historian Nathaniel Philbrick.
He was appointed commander-in-chief of the American forces in the American Revolutionary War. Those forces hardly existed at the time he was appointed, which was June 19, 1775, and the war would go till 1783, so that's an 8-year war. That's how long that thing went on. It's exhausting, tiresome, and awful. And there wasn't really much of an army. There also wasn't really anybody in the American forces, or nor anybody to be a candidate in the American forces who had ever moved large bodies of troops around before. And the British were, of course, very good at that. And that showed in the early battles. Washington was chosen on the nomination of John Adams and his cousin Sam Adams. And they, especially John, had a very shrewd idea about that. John Hancock, also from Massachusetts, as were the Adams, he was interested in the job, but he was from Massachusetts. That's where all the trouble had been, or almost all of it. Also up in New York there had been trouble. And Virginia, from which George Washington comes, had been relatively calm. And the Adams and many other people realized we have to unite the colonies in order to have any chance of defeating the British, and so let's pick a commander from Virginia, a very distinguished Virginian. George Washington was a farmer, and he was very well-to-do. He was an excellent farmer, and he loved to farm. He was an innovative farmer. He invented a way to drive horses around in a circle in a barn and winnow the grain, separate the wheat from the chaff, and then the good parts would filter down to a lower floor. He did lots of things like that. He was a slaveholder. He farmed with slave labor and free labor all his life, and he liberated all his slaves in his will, so they were all set free. He was known to treat them well. He had that country life. In fact, he died. When he died because he had a long day in the cold and the drizzle when he was out riding his horse, and he got a bad cough, and it eventually killed him. They didn't know how to treat things like that back then. So here's this man, and he's got some military experience. And the military experience, a lot of it is not very successful. That is to say, he was at Fort Necessity in Pennsylvania when the 7 Years' War, or the French and Indian War, it was called, in the United States, or in America, not the United States, opened. He was at the place where that big battle opened, and that battle was an episode in the long series of wars between France and England that very much affected North America in this particular dispensation of that old, long conflict. Go on until the defeat of Napoleon. So Washington was there, and he was a junior officer, and he fought bravely. He wrote to a friend, "I heard the bullets whistle, and there is something charming in the sound." George Washington looked like an incredibly distinguished man. He was tall. He was very handsome. He was a very reserved man. Many people close to him reported he was fun. He liked to have dinner, and he liked to drink, not too much. He liked to talk. But also he had a very strong sense of comportment. When he was a kid, he wrote 112 rules of civil behavior. And it's things like don't pick your teeth. And the last one is really beautiful. Labor to keep alive in your breast the celestial fire known as conscience. So he was a very well-directed, serious man, and he had a grand strategic sense, and that sense was, this is a big old country, and they're going to have a hard time subduing it. And so one of his aims was to preserve his army, and he did manage to do that. And it wasn't easy to keep them together, for one thing, because the Congress wasn't paying them. And it wasn't paying them because it didn't have any money, and it didn't have any money because the states wouldn't give it any money, although they would promise to. So most of Washington's career in the Revolutionary War was a tremendous mess. And, he lived with the troops. He was away from home for years and years, and he loved his home. He was away from his home for close to 9 years. And he suffered with the troops. And sometimes his wife, Martha, would come and suffer with the troops, for example, at Valley Forge. And he kept it together. And he kept his army in being. And he made it very hard for the British to win because they really had to conquer the land.
And here's Dr. Larry Arnn reading Washington's final words as a general to the Continental Congress in Annapolis on this day in history.
Happy in the confirmation of our independence and sovereignty, and pleased with the opportunity afforded the United States of becoming a respectable nation, I resign with satisfaction the appointment I accepted with diffidence, a diffidence in my abilities to accomplish so arduous a task, which, however, was superseded by a confidence in the rectitude of our cause, the support of the supreme power of the Union, and the patronage of Heaven. It is an indispensable duty to close this last act of my official life by commending the interest of our dearest country to the protection of Almighty God. Having finished the work assigned to me, I retire from the great theater of action, and bidding an affectionate farewell to this august body, under whose orders I have so long acted, I here offer my commission and take my leave of all the employments of public life. What a way to end, which has got to be one of the most consequential wars in all of human history. It established the United States of America, and he was the man who commanded it. And everyone knew it was his strategy that had won, and everyone knew that it was his determination and moral force that had kept an army in being, able to fight through many defeats and through impoverishment and lack of supply. And so he was the greatest man in the world.
To catch the rest of the story, go to the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.